Yo, what's going on guys? It is Fox98 here. Welcome back to a brand new video and another F1 debate for you guys today here on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the F1 2023 Italian Grand Prix exactly pretty much 1 week later. Well, that's kind of how we do things around here. If you ever enjoyed the video though, drop it a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here as well. And let's get straight into the weekend then. So, what did I personally think of the weekend? I thought it was another brilliant Grand Prix. I really enjoyed it. There was some amazing wheel-to-wheel racing, but I have put in brackets, or in commas in the title I will do, almost wheel-to-wheel racing, because there was a lot of moments where it was over the limit, but nothing was done about it. And in some regards, that's kind of good to keep the racing high intensity, but also it did cause a few issues personally for me. But starting things off with qualifying, as we obviously, tend to do. It was the second race weekend where we got to see the hard, medium and soft tyre format. Did I think it worked this time around? Not really. I don't think it made that much of a difference compared to Budapest. I think Budapest we saw, the Alfa Romeos were fastest in the first part of qualifying. Then it was the McLaren, I think, was the fastest in the second part of qualifying. And then it was Mercedes fastest in the third. So you'd say that actually it was a little bit more different, whereas this circumstance, no one really took off on a specific set of tyre. Everyone was kind of the same, and maybe that was because they had more knowledge from doing it the first time around. I'm not really too sure, but I'm not really a fan of it in terms of this time around. I still think for the qualifyings moving forward, we should be doing the hard, medium, soft in quali. I think that'd be really fun to see, but I do believe that we still need a little bit more testing on some other circuits, because right now we've had one good one, in my opinion, one bad one. Obviously, it was still a good qualifying session, don't get me wrong, but I think in order to determine, we have to do this, I think we need a couple more circuits in order to do that. I'm not sure if they're doing any more, because I know obviously we were meant to do it at Imola before the race was cancelled. And of course we have done it in Budapest and here now. So I don't know if there's any more later in the season, but if there are, then that'll obviously be very, very useful for us. And of course, we managed to see the Ferrari stick it on pole position. Carlos Sainz getting amazing pole position. Leclerc initially getting pole, Verstappen taking it away from him, and then Sainz coming in at the end to get that pole position. It was quite interesting actually as well in qualifying how, unlike basically every single time you go to Monza, a lot of teams and drivers were opting to go without the toe rather than going with it. And I don't know how they've managed to get to that point, but I'm fine with that. I'm absolutely fine with that, because Monza's been quite messy all the time with people trying to get the toe. But like Leclerc didn't use it. Verstappen used it once or twice. Both Mercedes used the toe and then realised that actually for them it was more suited for them to run without the toe. And yeah, it was quite interesting to see people going different routes. Some suited it, some didn't. And of course for Ferrari, obviously they suited it when, like I said, for Mercedes, they didn't suit it at all. So heading into the race itself though, obviously Sainz got the start that he needed to and defended against Max Verstappen. And he defended against him for 14 laps until he locked up and he went, well, he didn't go wide, but he offset himself horribly into the chicane, and Verstappen was able to go around the outside of the Curva Grande. I thought for just a minute that Carlos Sainz was going to stay ahead of Verstappen, especially when Sainz was re-pulling back ahead of him. I thought that he might be able to just stick on the brakes a little bit later, because he has been out-braking Verstappen throughout the majority of the race, but unfortunately Max had a little bit enough. I think he probably was clever with his battery deploying it to get alongside and slightly ahead, allowing Sainz to probably claw a little bit back, and then Verstappen would just squeeze on a little bit more just to keep himself level, and then go into the corner ahead. And from that point onwards, obviously, Verstappen was gone. He was away. And of course, we know what happens. He's won his 10th Grand Prix in a row, setting a record for the most consecutive wins in Formula 1 history. Fair play to him. At the end of the day, I'm sick and tired of watching Verstappen constantly just win. It bowls the hell out of me. However, you can't deny that what he's done is absolutely exceptional. And you just got to sit there and just applaud it. You're watching and witnessing history. Like, during the Michael Schumacher reign, with, a lot of people were fed up with Schumacher and watching him witness history, and it's like Vettel, when he was doing historic things, when he won 9 in a row at the end of 2013, like, I was so fed up with Red Bull winning and Vettel winning, and then you go to the Mercedes era, and then Hamilton getting all of his history records in the way of most wins, joining with the most amount of world titles and stuff. And while those were boring for some on that format, obviously they weren't necessarily boring for me because I'm a Mercedes Hamilton supporter. So those historic moments where it was like consecutive wins or just number of wins or number of poles or whatever, to me, I was happy to see that because it's history making, and B, obviously because it was a team and a driver that I like, whereas a team and a driver at the moment that's dominating, I really don't like. But it swings in roundabouts. At some point, maybe McLaren will go on a run, and then we'll get bored. The first time that we see Norris and Piastri win a Grand Prix for McLaren, if they stay at their respective teams, we'll all be buzzing about it. We'll be throwing our hands up in the air. But then if they won like 9 or 10 in a row, everybody would be calling for something to happen to stop McLaren from winning because they'd just be bored at it by the end. So you've got to take the rough and the smooth with that front. But the two Ferraris, I'll give them credit actually during the Grand Prix because they really put on a show for their home crowds. I'm about to hiccup halfway through. No, I'm not. I'm good. I'm subsiding it. They really put on a good show for their teams, for their fans as well. They were very, very on edge though in the second half of the Grand Prix, especially when Perez managed to clear Leclerc and then he cleared Sainz. The two of them just went at it for that final podium slot. In my personal opinion, I think Carlos Sainz deserved to step foot on the podium for what shocked me to hear, actually. The first time he's been on the podium at all this season. But I felt like he thoroughly deserved it. He was the man that was carrying Ferrari, in my opinion, all weekend long. He was the man that stuck that car on pole when, even when you were going around the lap, you would hear more people cheering when Leclerc, finished his lap, whether it was fastest in a session or fastest until the next set of drivers came along compared to Sainz. I felt like Sainz is a lot more disrespected in Ferrari, but at the end of the day, Leclerc is the main man. And, if you're going to go on a title challenge, well, I'd say you put Charles Leclerc in the fight for that, but we saw last season how that went. But I think Sainz deserved it. He was quicker all weekend long. He was better in the race in Leclerc. Obviously, Leclerc was able to stick in his DRS, but he was never really able to get ahead and pull away and so forth. So for Sainz, I think he thoroughly deserved it. Now, the racing between Sainz and Leclerc was extremely hard and very questionable at times. I think at the end of the day, because the two of them are teammates, it didn't really make too much of a difference. But, I felt like it was very, very on edge in that circumstance. And yeah, it's one of those nip and tucks. There was a couple of tricky moments in there where I felt, things were awful. And for this specific F1 debate, actually, as well, I don't really have a list of incidents in my head that I want to go through. So on my other monitor, which I'm looking at right now, I've actually just pulled up the Sky Sports race highlights. So I'm literally just going to go ahead and plug that in and find the incidents that I wanted to quickly talk about. So, I'm pretty much going to talk about the Grand Prix. I'll talk about the teams and the drivers. We'll move into the incidents then for the race, what I thought about them, and then we'll move into my predictions for the Singapore Grand Prix next weekend. So, stick around for the rest of the video and we'll get into that. So, I'm not going to talk too much about like some of the wheel-to-wheel racing because I'll go for it in the incidents panel anyway. And I need to get a transition for like race incidents, don't I? I need to just get some transitions in general for this F1 debate. I'll have to speak to Sam, see if he can do anything on that one. So, yeah, they went really, really close to basically wiping each other out of the Grand Prix, to be honest. They were really going for it. But at the end of the day, it was racing that I wanted to see. But there were a lot of moments, like Perez and Russell, for example, when they went off the track, both of them together, and Perez is like, he pushed me wide, and it's like, no, you didn't. Like the Hamilton Piastri, not the crash, which obviously we'll get into the incident panel on that one anyway, for sure. But I think it was either a lap or two earlier. Hamilton and Piastri, and the annoying thing is I actually can't find the incident, which is why I'll talk about it now, is that Piastri locked up, went wide, forced Hamilton wide in the process because Lewis had nowhere to go. And then Piastri went off the track and carried on. And he wasn't told to give the position back. And it was those type of incidents. Now, it wasn't just obviously Piastri and Hamilton. There was a lot of them when it was just like, how can you... why are you getting away with that? And like the Leclerc-Perez one, when Leclerc put Perez onto the grass, really. How's that type... it's a very fine line. It's a grey area, and it's a lot of 50-50 going on in all of that. But it was, at the end of the day, 90% of the racing was extremely hard, but extremely fair, which is what we wanted to see. Alex Albon, again though, what a weekend that man had. I mean, look, he's had a Williams car which is super, super quick in a straight line, so you kind of expect him to do, what Alex does, is do well with the car. Obviously, he's got a teammate of Logan Sargent that can't do that. And again, I've got to point my finger at Logan Sargent now that we're talking about Williams. That man really needs to step up. I don't even know if his future... I don't know if Williams are just playing it, out of behind closed doors. But I would genuinely be thinking about replacing Logan Sargent for 2024 because he's just not good enough. And I understand that rookies, in Formula One, you sometimes bear them the first season to get used to it. But when you're getting thumped as heavily as Alex Albon is doing right now to Sargent, aka out-qualifying in every single Grand Prix, getting a Williams car comfortably in the points, fighting McLaren, fighting Mercedes, Sargent can't get into the points. You've got to ask the question at some point, when is it actually worth us keeping this driver? Because in a position where Williams are in, they need as many points as possible in their fight with Alfa Romeo, Haas and AlphaTauri. If they're not getting points from one of their drivers, you're wasting your time. And for Williams, I'm sorry, I don't think Logan Sargent is the one. I think Sargent needs to be replaced in 2024. That's my opinion. I understand, look, it's super harsh because he is just a rookie. He's not raced at these circuits in a Formula 1 car. Obviously, he would have raced in a majority of them in F2. But I just feel that there's a line about how heavily you can be thumped before it's like, well, actually, you're not really going to get that far. Like, let's face it, like, who on the grid right now would want to sign Logan Sargent? With all due respect, I don't think anyone would. AlphaTauri would not do it. It's their own program, but Sargent's getting thumped. Alfa Romeo, Bottas and Zhou are quite well, collaborated with each other. Haas, well, they obviously go for experience. They don't go for the rookies. And again, if that was Mick Schumacher, he would have already been gone. Well, he is gone by now, but you know what I mean? There's nobody that would sign him. He is at a Williams car where if he was at the level of Albon's potential, if he was matching Albon or, beating him very, once or twice, but basically very close to Albon, you'd actually put your number in and say, well, what a lap from Alex Albon, but what a lap from Sargent because he's a rookie, and he's fighting tooth and nail with his own teammate. That's why the example of Oscar Piastri gets a lot more credit in my books than where anybody else does. Because as a rookie, he's taken that fight and for me, he's 100% on equal level with Lando Norris. And that's where a rookie should be. And Piastri will get that time now. And for me, unless he has an absolute horror show of the season, Piastri's got a good long career in Formula 1 ahead of him now that he can look forwards to. Sargent doesn't have that, and that's the difference between them. And speaking of talking about a McLaren and a Piastri, and obviously a Sargent of Williams, going to McLaren, it was a rough weekend for them. I thought it would be. I thought they'd have a bad weekend. Obviously, they did bring a new low downforce specification rear wing for this Grand Prix event, but it didn't really work. They still had a lot of drag on the car. They weren't really there or thereabouts. Obviously they got stuck behind Albon. They had better tyre wear than what the Williams had, but the Williams was just too quick in a straight line and it ruined their weekend. I thought maybe with the low downforce spec rear wing it could potentially bolster them, but it didn't. It just made them worse. So it is what it is on that front. And obviously for Aston Martin as well, again, I thought with them, if they went low downforce, it might help them out, and it didn't. Again, Alonso, I think he got P9 in the end, all things considered. I don't know if Stroll even got a point. Again, though, Lance Stroll, I think he got knocked out in Q1. Again, he's on a rolling contract, and he's been told that he's basically going to be staying for this season, for the next season. Don't see why any other team, if he wasn't in a team that was owned by his father, he'd be out of the door already, and probably trying to do something in IndyCar or something like that, because he's just, again, he's another one of those drivers I just find so frustrating. There's always that driver that's on the grid that just shouldn't be on the grid, and he is. So it is what it is. But that's basically where they're at. The final team that I thought obviously would struggle heading into this weekend would be Mercedes, and they did to an extent. They had the third fastest car basically on the grid. They maximised that well. Obviously, Russell put in an absolutely insane qualifying lap to qualify P4 ahead of Sergio Perez when the Mercedes was the slowest car in a speed trap out of everybody on the grid. Hamilton obviously couldn't get his quali the way he wanted to, but he worked himself well in the race, did the alt strat, and in the end it paid off despite the 5-second penalty. Even Russell got one actually. Both Mercedes actually. Very naughty boys, okay? You know, you need to, you're naughty, teasing you. They got the 5-second penalties. Both of them were thoroughly deserved. Hamilton's penalty on Piastri versus Russell's penalty for literally just going off the track and just saying, sod it, I'll gain 5 seconds anyway, who cares? And that's a little bit of something that maybe needs to look at in the rules for penalties, because it's like, yes, you get a 5-second penalty, but it didn't really make a difference. But then again, you could argue that if we had a safety car with 2 laps to go and Russell hadn't pitted again, then, you know, and they all crossed the line and finished under the safety car, then he'd be out of the points because the 5-second penalty would be too harsh, like Sainz's was in Australia. So it flips and flows. So actually, I kind of take that one back, actually, and all that. But they had the third fastest car, and they managed to basically completely maximise that. And I think that's what Mercedes... I think that's what they do better than any other of the teams fighting for second in the championship. I mean, they're second in the championship, but it's always like, as I've said before, if Aston Martin are the second fastest car on the grid, it's always Mercedes that are the next team there fighting them all the time. Obviously, unless Mercedes are genuinely the second fastest car, like, for example, Barcelona, when they got a double podium. So they maximised that. But if it's a different car that's the second fastest, like in this instance, it was Ferrari, the next team below them was Mercedes. Again, they're maximising so well. And I think not only is it slightly down to the car, it's also just down to the 2 drivers. They've got 2 elite class drivers in their ranks, and they are definitely pulling that Mercedes W14 further away than where it should be. But moving to Ferrari, again, it was a great weekend for them. They gave it everything, did Ferrari. There's no denying that. They couldn't really do anything much with strategy because, as Karun and everyone was saying, look, if they pitted, they'd be out in a whole bunch of traffic. It wouldn't have worked for them. Sainz did his best to defend against Verstappen, but I think when you're pushing as hard as he was, you were bound to potentially make a mistake. They then did everything they could to keep Perez back. They tried different things in the pit stops. It just didn't work out. Red Bull were just way too fast. But Ferrari, I'll give it credit where it's due. They put on a hell of a race to try and do something for their home fans. And at the end of the day, they did get a podium. So at least the Tifosi could celebrate that one. And of course, for Red Bull, it's another win. They've won literally every Grand Prix since the summer break of last season of 2022, bar one Grand Prix, which was the Brazilian Grand Prix, where Russell won both times during the sprint and also the main event. So it just shows that it's the Red Bull era, and I'm bored of it, but, you know, it is what it is. But unfortunately, the remaining of the weekend, or not really the weekend, but this week, has unfortunately been left, especially with Red Bull, in very sour terms. I'm not going to bring up the article. I'm not going to bring up what it says. You guys can literally just type it in yourself. But Helmut Marko, speaking in an interview, and basically just firing a bunch of xenophobic quotes towards Sergio Perez, I just think it's absolutely disgusting. The fact that he was trying to basically state that, Verstappen is, performing better than Perez, and Perez's form is fluctuating throughout the season, and yet he made a whole range of xenophobic quotes towards him, and I just think it's disgusting. It's your own employee, and you're like the head, basically, of F1, and you're just coming out here and effectively being racist towards your Formula 1 driver. It can't. I just don't understand how it happens. I don't know how it's been allowed to happen, and Marko will just get away scot-free now by just doing what he did and just putting out an apology, and then, yeah, sorry about that. I was racist, but oh well. Who's gonna sack me? No one. Come on. I mean, like I said, I don't like Red Bull. It's just a personal thing for me. I don't like Christian Horner. I cannot stand Helmut Marko, and I don't like Verstappen. That's the thing is, if it was, for example, let's just say it was like Fred Vasseur was the team principal, the head was someone, I don't know, Otmar Safnauer, just an example, I'm just saying it out there, you know, and their number one driver was Charles Leclerc or something like that, I'd probably have a little bit of feeling for Red Bull and be like, oh yeah, quite like them actually. But it's just the personnel within the Red Bull team is just what makes me hate them, and things like what Marco did, yeah, I just can't stand it. It's just really, really makes my blood boil when I see it. But what we're going to do now, though, is we're going to move over to the incidents section of this F1 debate, talk about some of those, because there's quite a few of them, and see what I thought of all of them. Okay, so we are here for the incident panel. So I've just gone ahead and picked out some of the incidents that I felt needed to just have a little bit of a look at, and basically what I can actually get access to. So here is the first incident that we're going to have a look at. It's Max Verstappen versus Carlos Sainz. There was a little bit of a discussion about this one over in the cool-down room during the Grand Prix itself. And this is when Verstappen attempted to pass Sainz. I think this was on like lap 5 or 6, something like that. Verstappen went for a move here. So as you can see, he's going for the run here. So Sainz is covering the inside line. Verstappen's going for the outside line. Here, what Verstappen is trying to do, he's trying to outbrake Carlos Sainz to make sure that he can basically get alongside. And as Sainz comes on through, basically, you know, force to move on the inside. So as they get towards the chicane here, you can see that Verstappen is doing just that. He's broken later at this point, but he hasn't quite got himself directly in front at this point. As we scroll on a little bit further forwards, you can see as the corner basically unfolds, this is where Verstappen now is losing out in the fight. You can see here that at this point now, Sainz is clearly ahead. His car is only going to drift towards the left-hand side of the circuit. So Verstappen at this point here basically has to do one of two things. Number one, or you can do three things really. Number one, he goes off the track completely, cuts the chicane and goes on through. Option two, he does what he ends up doing and he just backs out of it and then sets himself up because Leclerc is a little bit too far behind. Or he does option three, which is operation, as long as it's Lewis Hamilton, I'm going to go over the sausage curb and crash into his head. He goes with option number two of playing it sensible here. So he just lifts off the throttle and allows Sainz to go through. Now, Verstappen was saying at the time that was naughty from Sainz. In my opinion, that's not naughty at all. I think that's hard but very fair racing. You can see here that as Sainz is turning, he is on full lock, but he's allowed Verstappen racing room. But it's got to the point where Verstappen actually backs out a lot earlier anyway. And as they get through towards the apex, you can see here that Sainz, if he was being super aggressive, he'd be pushing. You know, Verstappen would have a wheel on the curb at that point, and then he would just cut the chicane anyway. So I think that it's actually a completely fair move, and Sainz did nothing wrong there. That is what I like to see as hard-fought racing, and I think nothing wrong with it. Okay, the next incident was a little bit of a weird one. This was Oscar Piastri coming out of the pits here, and he had a bit of a collision with his teammate. No investigation necessary, no penalties necessary, and I'm completely for it. But basically, this Oscar Piastri is coming out of the pits here. He's on colder tyres anyway, and as they come on through, they go into the chicane, and as you can see here, Norris is going around the outside. Now, at this point, what Lando is doing is absolutely fine. He's in front of Piastri going into the corner. As they go into the corner, Piastri on his cold tyres is understeered wide, and he's gone and basically just made contact with his teammate. Now, this shot right here, it just goes to show how lucky these two are, because Norris, if he was keeping up the speed that he was going at, he could have easily ran over the front of Piastri's front left tyre there. He could have easily sent Norris airborne. 100% could have done it. Very, very fortunate that the contact in the end was actually very minimal between them, because they made contact from tyre face to tyre face, but as the luck of the gods go, on this occasion, they were able to get with it scot-free. There's no real investigation necessary with it. Norris keeps his position, on Piastri stays behind, and then in the end, you know, it is what it is. I think if it was two different cars, so say it was Albon in the situation coming out and Norris staying in front, I still don't think anything would be done with it. I think the whole purpose of this is that Piastri is on fresh hard tyres. They do need to warm up. They're colder. Norris has had a lap where he's put some heat and temperature into it. He's just gone into the braking zone. Tried to see if he can stay in front of Norris, but at the end of the day, you know, Norris is on the outside of the track. If we just go back here, Norris is pretty much as to the outside as he can be. He probably, there's no more room that he could have really left there. You can see how much racing room that Piastri's got versus Norris. Obviously, Piastri's angle going into the corner is going to be a lot tighter, but he's trying to get out in front of Norris. No harm done. no penalty needed. Right, now this is the incident. Funnily enough, I did actually manage to find it. This is the incident that I genuinely felt that didn't get investigated, and it just went completely under the radar. And maybe because Hamilton and Piastri made contact, it maybe just, changed things a bit. But this is what I'm talking about here. So while the racing was hard, just hard, there was a lot of times, like this incident here, where I felt like the racing was unfair. So as Hamilton goes in towards the Curva Grande here, Piastri's got the run, and he's still alongside. But Hamilton's getting to the point where he is now alongside. He's obviously using some of his battery to do this. Now, as they break into the corner, you can see here that by the time they get to the braking point, around about here, they're about level. So at this point, it's fair game, who goes into the corner when. But the problem I've got is Hamilton goes into the corner here, and he's actually a tiny bit ahead. And it's to the point where even the scorecard over here, not scorecard, but you know what I mean, the race leaderboard has actually flipped, because at this specific point now, Hamilton and Piastri are level. Hamilton's in front of Piastri now. Of course, yeah, he's on the outside line. Fine. It's always much harder to go around the outside, but crucially, he is there. Now, as they go in towards the corner here, round they go. Piastri now at this point, he's obviously trail braking, because he's all of a sudden like, oh my god, I'm going to lose the position here. I need to try and force Hamilton wide, because Hamilton's basically he's outbroken him. But as they're going through now, it's very hard because this angle's not very good. They don't really show any replays of this, but they get into the corner and you can see the lockup, because Hamilton effectively right here, there it is. You can see the lockup just underneath, because Piastri has taken the corner too deep. He's gone in too deep into the corner, but Hamilton's at a stage where he has to lock up because he's got nowhere else to go. And as they go then through, as we put it on through, you can see here, perfectly from the onboards, Piastri doesn't even make the corner. He's actually cut the corner, with Hamilton going around the outside. Now the difference here is that because Lewis Hamilton's going around the outside, and because he's also in front, very fractionally over Piastri, it's not as easy. Hamilton can't just take the escape road and then go on with it. If Piastri had a tiny bit of his car ahead, like we saw with Sainz, and Hamilton went off the track, then it's a failed overtake. You weren't ahead into the next apex. It's hard but fair racing. But here, this is where I found that it was unfair racing. And this wasn't just Piastri and Hamilton, it's just the only example I could get up. Here, Hamilton's around the outside. He's ahead in the apex of that corner. Obviously, he's not going to take the apex. He's on the outside. Piastri's then gone in way too deep because he's been outbroken. So he's trying to hold on to the position. But right here, he's actually gone off the circuit. Hamilton then had to go off himself. But because Hamilton's locked up, because he's had to turn out of it, he can't just turn out of it and then take the apex and go along. He's at the point where, Piastri's gone off. So he just has to go off with him. This right here, for me, in my personal opinion, and you guys can completely agree or you can disagree, hence why this is the F1 debate, we debate about it all. I think Piastri should have been given a 5-second penalty for this specific incident. In my opinion, I think he's gone off the track and he's gained an advantage because Hamilton at the braking point was ahead, and obviously he hasn't even made the apex himself, and from this point onwards, you can see that he is fractionally ahead, and then obviously Piastri comes back at him, and that's when Hamilton there, because he's come in too much, he can't, he's got nowhere to go. Hamilton in this circumstance, he's not going to get forced wide if he stayed on the racing line. If Hamilton stayed on the racing line, there's a crash incoming, and in this circumstance here, Piastri goes off the track. I think Piastri should have had a 5-second penalty for this, but the stewards didn't do anything. All right, and then literally a lap later, we move to Hamilton versus Piastri, and again, it's another fight. This time, Hamilton's got the inside line, which is absolutely fine. As they go through the Curva Grande, Piastri's actually very much slightly ahead. Hamilton comes back at him, though, in the secondary phase. You can see here that he's just pulling onto him, so it's almost like the Mercedes is either A, using his battery, which he could well have been doing, but I think that's probably what he was doing. I think what Piastri was doing was using his battery on the entry, which is why he was pulling away. And then as he was harvesting his battery, Obviously, Hamilton was then coming back at him using his battery. And of course, I think why Hamilton's was more effective because A, he would have had better top-end speed. But I think B, when Piastri was using his battery, he is trying to use it in an out-traction format in versus Hamilton. And of course, remember, Hamilton's on the softer medium tyres, Piastri on these older, harder tyres. So here, you know, even though he got that initial better run, he obviously used that with his battery, whereas Hamilton now has the top end speed coming into his play. Moving through in towards here, they go in towards the Curva Grande. It's very hard to see it from here, but this is where the contact lies. It's very, very simple. Even Lewis Hamilton said it in his post-race press conference in the media pen. He's gone on, he's cut across over Piastri. Apparently that's where his blind spot is. We've never sat in a Formula 1 car before, so we can't really judge that. But Hamilton got a 5-second penalty for this. Piastri lost his front wing. 100% a 5-second penalty for Lewis Hamilton. He's cut across Piastri. He's not given him the space. He would have been absolutely fine with this. Why has Hamilton done this in the first place, you're probably asking? It's nothing to do with the previous lap when Piastri ran him off the road. What Hamilton's trying to do here, for those that maybe don't quite know or just think he's just being stupid and rash, if Lewis Hamilton was a little bit further outwards and gave Piastri the room, what he's effectively doing is that if he brakes at a specific time, he's giving Piastri the opportunity to brake later, use the width that he's got with him to then, you know, try and swoop around the outside and keep the position. What this type of closing in or this pincer movement that the drivers try to do, which either A, pays off, or B, in this circumstance, doesn't, is if you then try to outbrake your opponent, because they're so close to your car, you need pure precision to get through. And in most occasions, because that right-hand side or the left or right-hand side, depending on the corner you're going through, if your car is basically nip and tuck with theirs, you basically block them in, and then that inside live driver line goes on through and he takes the place. So in this circumstance, Hamilton got it wrong. We know what he was trying to do. He was trying to execute the pincer, but he's actually gone and actually crashed into Piastri. 5-second penalty, thoroughly deserved, definite penalty in my opinion. And that's what the stewards also thought. Okay, so here's the last incident that we were going to be talking about here. And it's basically a carbon copy of the Piastri Hamilton incident from, you know, a few laps ago. But it's between the two Ferrari drivers. And again, this is where I just think you've got to give a penalty, surely. So, where are we at? So as they go through to getting towards Curva Grande, the two Ferraris are fighting tooth and nail for that final place on the podium. Now, as they come into the corner here, Leclerc, again, look, he's fractionally ahead of Carlos Sainz going into this chicane, and that gives Sainz basically the hurry up to outbrake my opponent. How does he do that? He locks up going into the corner a lot more severely than what Piastri did versus Hamilton. Piastri mostly just as he put on the brakes, he then lifted off and just went in too deep. Sainz here is really trying to get into the corner, but he's gone too wide. As he's done that, then you can see here Leclerc's trying to go through. Leclerc's had to weave off a little bit. I'll just play it in full volume, at full speed here. Going into the corner, Leclerc's going through, and then you can just see that wiggle where he's basically has to get out of the corner. In doing so, then Sainz goes off the circuit, as you can see, and Leclerc is also gone off the circuit. Sainz holds on to the position, and he keeps the position as well. In this circumstance here, that is cut to the corner and gaining an advantage. I think Sainz should have been given a 5-second penalty for that. Obviously, it would have been harsh considering all the hard work he's done, but I just cannot see how you can legally be able to get away with that. And this is what I meant by the hard, but also almost brilliant racing, because there's just stuff like this where it's just inconsistent. That had to be penalised. So finally, we need to talk about our race prediction heading for the Singapore Grand Prix next weekend. My personal opinion, it's actually going to be very hard to determine what's going to happen, specifically because there is a new technical directive that is coming out, which will basically nullify flexi body parts on the car, especially like the flexi wings, especially on the front wings, to be honest. They'll really be toning down on some flexi aero components for these cars. So it's the first time it's going to happen this weekend in Singapore, next weekend in Singapore. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the actual pecking order is. Will it make a big difference? It might do. It might not do. It's going to depend on basically whose wings flex the most as to if it makes a difference or not. So it's hard to build a prediction based off of that. So what I'm going to do my prediction on is based on what we've seen so far this season, not really concluding you know, the flexible wing scenario section. So what do I think will happen? Well, I think Red Bull will obviously be basically winners. There's no one I can't see Red Bull losing a race at all this season. I think Mercedes and McLaren will take a big uptune in fortune. I think Mercedes will probably be the second fastest. I think they've had the best car on high downforce. They just need to get qualifying right, but Singapore is a very, very warm circuit, so maybe getting temperature into the tyres shouldn't be as difficult. But it is also very humid, so it's not necessarily pure heat coming onto the track. It's very sticky and very greasy, so maybe it might tune away from them. Of course, there is a new layout now, so they basically avoid the final four corners in the final sector, because they're doing some work under there. So for now, they just go straight on, which might maybe tune things a little bit more and help the tyres a bit. But obviously, you know, high downforce suits Mercedes to an absolute T. We saw how good they were in Budapest, in Barcelona, in Zandvoort, even though they were unlucky in Zandvoort because of their own wrongdoings. McLaren, again, I think they'll be strong. You know, again, Budapest, they were really quick. Zandvoort, they didn't really make the most of it too much, but I think McLaren will definitely be up there. Aston will probably be in front of Ferrari. Of course, Ferrari took third in the Constructors last weekend after their double podium. But I think Singapore is a track that will definitely suit towards their weaknesses. But again, it depends on the flexiness of the wings. Alpine will definitely take a step forwards. They were awful in Monza, but we, again, like Zandvoort, they are quick when there's more downforce on the cars. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens on that front. But that is it for the F1 debate here for the Italian Grand Prix. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, subscribe if you're new around here as well. And I will see you guys for the next video very, very soon. Take care all, guys. Peace.